right. Evelyn, welcome to Living Off Rentals.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. And for our listeners' sake, who might not have met you yet, so Evelyn's been doing Airbnbs since shortly after Airbnb was a thing. She started early on, I think it was 2010, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
2010.
nice. Yeah, and it was with one of the bedroom, a bedroom in her own home. And then since then, it's just grown from there. And now she's the host of the Hosting Journey podcast. So kind of meta there. You're the host of the Hosting Journey and the Facebook group that matches that name and the website. So you can check that out. She also owns several vacation rentals in areas across the U.S. and Puerto Rico, mainland U.S. and Puerto Rico. And so I'm excited to talk to you. Just, you've got such a depth of knowledge in short-term rentals. So I'd love to dive into that. But first, I'd like to hear a bit more about your background and kind of how you got started with this.
Oh my God, I have that sad story. And this is one of the reasons that Airbnb had tapped me to talk to the media back when we were fighting in New York, the city.
Yeah, you know the owners, right?
Yes, I do. I do know Brian and Joe and Nate, and they're amazing.
Yeah.
It's just as amazing. Look, I know a lot of people have this love and hate relationship with Airbnb. Yeah. But I am so grateful for them. Every single day. In 2010, I lost my career as a producer. This is, I don't know what you were doing in 2010. You were in the military, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I worked as a producer for TV commercials for many years, too many. And then the economy crashed, and with it, my career. I was always a freelancer, so I didn't have like that full-time job, which meant I couldn't collect unemployment. Because it wasn't like now that they gave unemployment to everybody. Back then in 2008 and 9 and 10, they weren't. It was sort of like you had to have a job.
Yeah.
And I was, because I never experienced it, I was sort of like, oh, I'm going to get a job at any time. I'll be fine. It'll be fine. Well, 5 months later and no job and a mortgage to pay and all this other stuff. I was like, no. Mama has to do something. And I found Airbnb on an article. And I still remember first of all, I remember my first guest. I remember we threw a party the day before my guests were arriving.
That's not typically recommended.
No, I don't recommend that because my guests found me cleaning. But there was extra beer for them. And they came from Amsterdam. So they loved that. Yeah. Yes. But no, don't throw a party the day before guests are arriving. Make sure, on the contrary, have the place clean.
Yeah.
And I literally I put up my bedroom and I got bookings immediately. And I actually turned down the first ones. I was sort of like, no, I'm not ready. And I gave up my own bedroom. So I moved out of the house. I had a roommate. And then he moved out because he was like, I'm not living with strangers. And I was like, I'm fine with it. And I moved back in. And I have not stopped since 2010. It started with the bedroom. The house it was a 2-family. And then my long-term tenant moved out. And I was like, okay, fine. Thank you. Let me put that on Airbnb. And it was amazing, just amazing. And I never wanted to grow it. I never wanted to grow the company, like the Airbnb side of business. I wanted it for me, it was enough. One listing, I was grossing over $100,000 a year.
Wow.
I know. One house. And I was like,
where you're living too, right?
And where I was living too, exactly. So for me, it was like, I'm house hacking. I'm living rent free. All my bills are getting paid. I am living with strangers, but the strangers come and go all the time. So it wasn't like a roommate. And I always felt that the house was too big for me because it was just me as one person, not like I had a boyfriend or husband or kids. And I met a lot of great people.
Yeah.
I have some really good friends from those 10 years, people that will come every year. I got a lot of grandparents. I love grandparents.
Yeah.
Grandparents are good guests. And yeah. So that was my life, 2010. And it's been now 11 years. Airbnb's anniversary is this week.
Is it? Wow,
yes.
I didn't know that.
When they were born.
And it started '07, right? Was in
Yeah, oh
the,
07, oh
yeah,
08.
technically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been an amazing thing. And just think about all the people that are just made careers out of these three guys that decided to do
Yeah.
this.
Right. Yeah, I was just talking about it recently, and vacation rentals or short-term rentals have been around forever, but Airbnb just made it to where, like you said, you can make a great salary and have your housing expenses paid for and meet incredible people. I mean, I can tell from your personality, it's a perfect fit for you, and so that's, and I think when you started, it probably was mostly people sharing their own house, right? I mean, that was the majority of hosts at the time.
There were a lot of us like that, because
Mhm.
that was the original concept.
Yeah.
And then it just grew immediately into, private homes and private apartments and things like that. Um, for one of my experiences, which has always been interesting because I've been in Facebook groups and things like that, was that mentality that other owners of vacation rentals had, where it was like, oh, Airbnb is not going to last
Yeah.
and it's not professional.
Mm.
And for me, it was like, oh, live with a stranger and tell me how professional you have to be, because it is crazy the things that you could go through with living with strangers.
Yeah.
But fortunately, the great thing about that is that they live. They're not staying with you all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's true. And so you've done both then, it sounds like. So you've had people in your house and then also have done separate. Which do you prefer?
Not with me.
Not with, yeah. Okay.
Not with me.
Yeah.
You look, man. The good thing about living with guests is, first of all, house hacking. You live rent free and all this other
Hmm.
stuff, and your house is clean all the time because you're
Yeah.
cleaning all the time.
Hmm.
When I don't live with guests, my house is like, well, I don't have to clean. I
Yeah.
can leave the dishes in the sink for a couple of hours and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I do miss some of my guests,
Hmm.
but you have to be on. The bra has to stay on all the time, which is not the best
Oh,
thing.
I hear you. Yeah.
And for you, it would be like you
Uh,
would have to get out of your pajamas.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. No, there is a certain level of, it's nice to be able just to relax in your own house, I'm sure. So, yeah, I hadn't tried that. Most people who I've brought on the podcast have just done it, in separate homes. And I think that's become the majority of people on Airbnb. But I've always been curious on that because obviously it's a
I
great
have
way to pay your
stories.
bills.
I have stories. And
Yeah.
and I never felt threatened or
Okay.
scared, or especially as a woman and as a
Hmm.
single woman living
Yeah.
with and I was not like, oh, it has to be only women. I accepted guys, I accepted couples, and things like that. So for me, I never went in with fear,
Mhm.
with the living with strangers. So I never felt like, oh no, something's gonna happen.
Yeah.
But it was great. I have some I'm like, I'm talking to you and I'm thinking about like all those amazing guests that I
Yeah.
had, that had just come through my life. So it's been, yeah, it's
That's
been great.
awesome. That's
And
awesome.
also the ones that you look, I always had this thing. It's like this: the guests you love to see and the guests you love to see go.
That's right. I'm sure. Yep. Yeah. We did our basement apartment, in our own personal house back in 2017. We converted the basement it was a walkout basement. So we converted it into a 1 bedroom apartment.
Mhm.
And, it was kind of the best of both worlds because we didn't have to necessarily entertain them or interact with them at all. They had a separate entrance. So it really didn't impact our life, but we had people come from Germany. We had people come from all over the US. And the ones that we wanted to interact with, we had a patio out front. And so they'd sit out there a lot. And so we could go down and introduce ourselves and hang out with them. And in the same way, we met some really great people that way. So I think it's such a cool way to make a great living and, just meet people and socialize and that sort of thing. So, so you eventually had a change though. You had the house in Brooklyn and you decided to sell that. Can you kind of talk through how that happened?
Regulations.
Regulations. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is my home.
Hmm.
I bought this house. In it would have been 17 years this year. I didn't buy it with intention to rent or anything like that. It was going to be my home. I bought it with like, oh, I'm gonna have a family. Um, and I started Airbnb. And in New York, regulations, they just came after us, and they have come after us for a long time. I mean, I've spoken to the press, I've been to the state capitol, I've spoken to city councils, I've spoken
Wow.
everywhere, because this is your private home and you're still not allowed to do it.
Yeah.
So the only that what happened was, through many years, there's been a lot of different regulations and things that they kept adding. What the city kept doing was saying, oh well, if you advertise on Airbnb, that's illegal, if and we're going to fine you. If you don't have sprinklers in the house, that's illegal, and we're going to fine you. And the fines are thousands of dollars a day. We're not talking about just a couple
Wow.
of $100. Yeah, no, there's no joke on this. It's New York.
Yeah.
They come after you. And mind you, my neighbors knew about it. I lived in the house. It's not like this was a party house or
Right.
anything like that. My neighbors will use my house for their family members. So if they had extra family members coming, they will stay in my place and things like that. But in 2020, Airbnb and New York City decided to partner up, and Airbnb gives the city our information as hosts if you rent for less than 30 days.
I see. Okay.
So any data is shared with the city if you're renting for less than 30 days.
Mm.
Exactly.
Yeah, makes it real difficult to get around it then.
Exactly. And look, in Puerto Rico, it's legal to rent. So I have a hotel number, I file taxes, I do all the paperwork. Right now they have like, during COVID, they had like all these regulations that you had to fill out of every guest had to fill out a form. I follow that. I'm okay following whatever rules you want me to follow, but let me work and let me do my business.
Yeah.
In New
Yeah.
York, it was sort of like, yeah, no, no, no. You could if you want to do more than 30 days.
Yeah.
And 30 days income was not enough. And it wasn't, it was a 120-year-old home.
Hmm.
So it always needs a lot of something,
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of repairs, a lot of things.
Hmm.
And financially, it had a lot of equity in it. It had
Hmm.
over $1 million worth of equity. And I was sort
Wow.
of like, let's sell and let's go, what's next.
Yeah. It's so crazy that right. I mean, in the middle of a pandemic, and when a lot of people were moving out of the city, they're going to make regulations that much more difficult for
Mhm.
people who, especially like you said, like if it's, I can understand a little more, I guess, if you're renting out a separate house, but your own personal house, like to regulate who can come in and sleep in a spare bedroom in your house seems like a little bit of an overreach to me, but that's kind of crazy.
Oh, no, no. And the regulations are very strict. And look, the interesting thing is this: this is happening all over the United States. It's
Mhm,
not just us here in New York.
mhm,
Because in my Facebook group, The Hosting Journey, a lot of people comment like, oh, there's new regulations in my city. I
mhm.
cannot rent out, or, they're grandfathering in. Some people, they're not grandfathering in. Some others, because I would have loved being grandfathered in, believe me.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a clientele of over 10 years that they still email me, and they're like, hey, do you have your Brooklyn house and things like that? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't.
Yeah.
Because once you create your brand, and especially if your properties are not just a destination and that they're more in the community.
Mhm.
For me, I was getting a lot of people that came to visit relatives.
Mm. Yeah.
That, I mean, I will get people coming as tourists to come and visit in New York, but I wasn't in Manhattan. I'm in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So you have to want to live in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would get a lot of people that would just come to visit families or come for events and things like that. And they will come year after year.
Hmm.
And there are hotels near my. It's not like they're not hotels, but people stayed at a vacation rental, they're going to stay longer.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
have. and they bring more family, they're spending more money, but they don't see that. The city doesn't see that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy.
It was, and believe me, and I don't want to say it was a tough decision. It was just like this huge reality check of say like, okay, this is, what do you want to do with this house?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what had happened was in 2019, I grew up in Puerto Rico and my mom is there. So I went down to Puerto Rico for a month. And I would work from there. And then I met my boyfriend and I decided to work and move to Puerto Rico. So between 2019 and actually 2019 or 2019, I will go back and forth and live between Puerto Rico and New York. So then when the city decided, I was sort of like, okay, I'm just gonna sell.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
That
know?
makes sense. And
Yeah.
and you then branched out though into other markets, and you brought up regulation, which I think is a huge concern for most people getting into this. So how did you decipher through where it made sense to buy and how to avoid a similar situation, in a different location?
Yes, and so one of the first things that we did was like my boyfriend has a house in Puerto Rico, and he has a small house, like a cita, this
Mhm.
2-bedroom house above his.
Okay.
So we started doing that, and it was amazing to be regulated. It's like, oh my God,
Breath of fresh
you
air.
don't look, you don't have the fear of that they're coming to knock on
Yeah.
your door, and like all of these things. So it was fantastic. But we started that property in December 2019, and we were open for 3 months, and then COVID happened.
Oh, jeez.
And we closed it down because it was right above us and it was just a little bit too close for comfort. And Puerto Rico regulations were no joke. Well, Puerto Rico regulations for COVID were like really, really strict. So we started up again in May, and it's been now like a year, and it's great. We had invested some money in fixing the house, and we just finishing recuperating the finances. So when I sold Evelyn 1.0, I found out I had cancer at that time. So I was packing and to move out and sell. I found out that I got cancer, and I had to hire someone to search for me.
Yeah.
And the search became, it has to be in a legal state. It has to be legal, not just the state, but the city. If there's an HOA, it has to be legal in the county, because the city might be legal, but that doesn't mean that your county is legal or your
Mhm.
community is legal.
Right. Yeah.
So we were very like, we looked into a lot of different states. We narrowed it down. It was going to be Georgia and Arizona.
Okay.
And all others, we would go looking into Florida, North Carolina, but because also we were looking in the middle of one of the biggest real estate market prices.
Yeah.
Like it was not the time to buy.
Yeah.
I ended up buying in Georgia.
Okay.
So I'm in the mountains of Georgia by LJ.
Nice.
And it's all a lot of regulations, state parks, what's nearby. We were going to look in Tennessee, but Tennessee, it's sort of like there's too many people now, too many people doing vacation rentals. So
Yeah.
you got to look deep into the markets.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So you started from a regulation standpoint then. So you started with researching state regulations, and then narrowed it down to the exact location.
Mhm.
What, I guess, where would you find that information?
Oh, internet, the
Yeah.
interwebs.
Searches.
You
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
and you gotta and not be afraid of calling the state,
Yeah.
because they might give you some phone numbers and things like that, and just call the state. Like in Georgia right now, like you have the state and then you have the county,
Okay.
and both of them collect taxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the tax rate, what were the tax rates? What were the property fees? There's so much information that you have to search when you're buying.
Yeah. Yeah. So it started, I mean, so there's a combination of all this, the factors that went into it that you analyzed, narrowed it down to this location in Georgia. And then once you decided to move forward with a property or multiple properties, it sounds like you never visited the property. So how
Nope.
did you,
Oh, it's
how'd you get it to from like deciding on a property to like having an Airbnb set up?
it's been a journey. And I have visited the properties now twice,
Okay,
both for like 48 hours each trip
got it.
because it's been between treatments.
Okay, yeah,
It's having a team. And
okay.
that's my last YouTube video. It's all about team building
Hmm.
because without a team, you cannot do anything. Even if you're
Yeah.
hosting on site, even if you're not remote hosting like I am.
Hmm.
And I think I'm like an extreme remote host that I didn't even see the properties in person,
Yeah.
but I did have someone looking at them. It's
Okay.
not like I was blindly just looking by the listing on Zillow, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to, like, the property might look great on the photos because that's what they always do, right? They're going for the
Hmm.
best photos, but is it in a nosy street? Who's around you? What's around you?
Yeah.
What does it actually looks like?
Hmm.
um and then we did numbers. My God, we were analyzing properties upon properties upon we have a whole spreadsheet with formulas of like, all right, what's the average rate? What are we gonna do? What are we gonna make? And then there comes the reality. Then you buy, and then you're like, well, I need to fix this, and I need to add this, and oh crap, my budget was $30,000. Now it's $60,000 that I'm spending
Yeah.
because,
Yeah.
as you know,
Yep.
you go into like, I'm only gonna fix this, and that becomes,
Yeah.
oh, I'm only replacing the sink in the bathroom. And then you just cut the walls and
Yeah. It's hard to know where to stop at some point. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So your team then, who are the main members that you would say
okay.
are?
So I had Michelle from City Army, and she traveled the United States for about
Wow.
2 months. So I did a 1031 exchange. I know you
Okay.
know what that is.
Hmm.
Just in case for the people, 1031 exchange is you basically you sell an investment property and you buy in kind. And in kind, it could be a condo, it could be a house, or what it doesn't have to be, it cannot be a boat. You're not buying another
Yeah.
boat, you're just buying, a similar, you buy in real estate. So I did a 1031 exchange. As you know, you have 45 days to identify properties, which is a very short time. Let me tell you that. Um,
In the
and
hot
she,
market.
yes, yes. I mean, we will look at properties and they will be off the market in 24 hours. It would
Mm.
be like, no, not available. No, not gone. Like,
Wow.
okay. But that's the roll of the dice. You gotta like just say, this is where I'm at. I wish I wasn't here, but I have to roll with it.
Hmm.
Um, I wanted to be another consideration that we had was natural disasters.
Mm.
So, we wanted more inland. I didn't want things in the winter, like heavy snow. Like I didn't want Vermont or like, eh,
Chicago.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, I didn't want any of that. Because I didn't want to be dealing with snow and the damages that it does.
Hmm.
I also did not want to really be in hurricane area, which is right now, it feels like it's all over the United States. So I had like some sort of like ideas of like, well, another thing we wanted was a no more than 2-hour drive from the airport,
Mm. Okay.
from a main airport.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was specific criteria for me because I'm going to be traveling to them. I'm
Yeah.
not local to that property.
Hmm. Yeah.
So for me, it's sort of like, well, if you're going to be traveling to it, how far do you want to go? And the properties right now are about an hour and a half from the Atlanta airport.
Okay.
And thankfully, Atlanta flies direct from Puerto Rico and New York.
Nice.
I
Yeah.
know. I know.
Yeah. That's like a great hub right there.
It's a great hub. Atlanta's a really, really good hub. So we had like all these criterias that we talked about and everything else. And this is one of the things that she does is like searches for properties, and analyzes them. We use, of course, AirDNA
Hmm.
for property analysis. And then we just looked at properties, and by then you're like, okay, I have to buy something.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and mind you, I didn't finish my 1031. My 1031 exchange finishes today. I did not spend all the money.
Oh, wow. But you got a lot of it reinvested though.
I got 3 properties. I invested about $700,000 and I needed to invest in 1.2 million.
I see. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is but
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that timeline, it's sort of a blessing and a curse, I think, because it forces you to make a decision
Mhm.
on one hand. But also, if you don't do it by a certain time frame, then you're going to pay taxes on the rest of it. So
And
yeah.
also if I mean, you're buying in wherever the market is at, right?
Mhm.
Like it's a seller's market, that's where you're at.
Yep.
And it's sort of like, okay, you just gotta say, well, this is where I'm at, and I'll make money one way or another.
Yeah. Yep. So she traveled and found the properties for you. Did she actually like set up the furnishings and that
No,
portion of it too? Okay.
no,
So
no, no,
how
no.
did that go?
So we're still working on 2 of the 3 properties right now
Okay.
because we're in construction.
Yeah.
One of the things that I decided also, because I knew I was buying multiple properties, we wanted only 2 states and we wanted the properties to be near each other.
Got it.
Because once you build that team, if it's a good team, it's golden.
I hear you. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we were buying 2 in Georgia and we were buying the rest in Arizona, but Arizona was just a very complicated market.
Mm.
And mind you, I did a lot of stuff like you have to be registered there, you have to have your business registered there, but I also have a brick like
Oh, yeah. Like
it's
a
not a simple.
storefront type company.
Yes. So we had to I had to do a bunch of different things. But the property in Arizona did not appraise. It
Mm.
was short by $100,000.
Holy cow.
So
Difference.
I said it's not worth it. I also needed to invest money in it. And I was like, you don't want to start being underwater.
Yeah. And the sellers wouldn't come down when
No,
appraisal came in.
not
Wow.
at all. Not at
Huh.
all.
Jeez. That's crazy.
I was like, no, because it was a seller's market.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for them, it was like, well, you're not paying for somebody else will.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, and this is one of the things. It's like, even if you buy in cash, get an appraisal.
yeah.
Definitely get an inspections. Don't forget your inspections. Do and get appraisals, just because that's what people want to sell for. Then that's the reality of what things are appraising at.
Yeah. So the ones that you did get, you said you did some rehab on. How did you find the contractors remotely to do that?
Facebook.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great.
I joined Facebook groups locals, like
Okay.
from that town. I posted, and I also researched the Facebook groups, like people recommendations and what were they doing and everything else. It has been a ride. And I love my guy. I love my construction guide. This is the biggest project he's done because we're doing 3 houses
Yeah.
and different constructions in each one. One of them, like right now, today, we're redoing in a basement. We adding a bathroom and a bedroom.
Okay.
So these are big projects.
Yeah.
It's not just painting.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
talking about like, okay, I'm spending all this money. Am I gonna make it?
And are you just monitoring via like FaceTime? Is that
A lot of photos.
okay?
I have a designer who's amazing. And
Nice.
he had gone down. He was in Atlanta for another job, and
Mhm.
he went and met him.
Okay.
And he was like, "Oh, he's really cool." And I was like,
Nice.
"Fantastic." And I also, right now with construction people, you gotta book them. If you're gonna work in September, you gotta book them in July.
Yeah. Yeah.
You cannot
Especially for good
wait.
ones. Yeah.
Exactly. Everybody's booked. There's a lack of good workers out there. I'm working on another project here in New York, and the construction guy just ghosted.
Mm.
And he was someone that has done like 3 jobs for me, so he wasn't a stranger. But things happen, and you just have to like just flow. Things are taking longer, a lot longer than expected, and spending a lot more money.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's all
that sounds
remote.
nice.
We do a lot of photos. We
Yeah.
do. He's now trained to my style, where he knows like I want to see it all.
Yeah.
And I'm, I pay by the job, and I'm like, I'm not paying you if I don't have receipts, if I don't have pictures, you're not getting money.
Yeah.
But
That's
he's
good incentive.
amazing. He's
Yeah.
amazing. He's really good. He got sick in the middle of the job
Mm.
where he was in the hospital and everything else.
Wow.
It's just tough. And you cannot, like, you just have to say, this is where I'm at.
Yep.
This is where I'm
Yep.
at.
You got to expect in real estate, there's always stuff that comes up, but it's like you become a problem solver. I think, and that's the key. And so once he's done, then are you planning to have a professional property manager take over, or are you planning to manage it yourself? And how will that work out?
So his ex-wife, who was his wife when we started working together, is a property manager and a cleaner.
Okay.
And so we already have one house up and running.
Okay. Got it.
It started running in July.
Yep.
And the month was sort of like, she did the cleaning, which is great, but the property management wasn't there. And the way I'm working it is that I like to keep my brand, everything, all my communications and all my reviews in my brand.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know this, but with property managers, they want to hold those reviews into their brand.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, the property management companies over there are charging 35%.
Wow.
Which is a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So what I did was I worked something out where I paying 15% for just on-site help. And then I do all the communications with the guests and everything else. Yeah.
Got it.
But it's having a team, man. It's just like that team that has to be local.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a huge concern for a lot of people want to do this remotely, whether it's a vacation house they want to use themselves, or just, they live in California where everything's like multiple millions of dollars and they want to buy somewhere else. So I appreciate that insight. That's really helpful. Another concern people have, and I know you have a little bit of experience with this, is when stuff goes wrong, like they feel like, well, then it's going to be the end of the world. I understand that you had a guest check out and check in the day after a massive hurricane or earthquake hit Puerto Rico. It's hard to keep track of the natural disasters.
I know.
But I had a buddy of mine from Puerto Rico on the show just a few weeks ago, and he talked about his experience during that same time period. So I'd love to hear how you handled that situation, because
communications.
You got through it. Communications, got it. Okay.
It's so important.
Yeah.
Like right now, I'm about to have a guest. We having guests landing today to Puerto Rico, and there's a big storm happening over there. And for me, is like, it was the first time I was dealing with them. No, it wasn't, because I dealt with a hurricane in New York. But in Puerto Rico, it was like earthquake, and not only that, but also we had no electricity. We still have water in our part of the country, but not electricity. The entire island had no electricity, and a lot of parts in the islands had no water.
Got it.
The guests were coming from another area, so they were grateful that they had water coming, and they were amazing. They were actually really, really good guests. But it's being honest, like, that this disaster is about to happen. Like, things, well, not with an earthquake, because earthquakes just happen. But if you have hurricane season happening, if you have, winters and things like that with the snows, and beforehand, the weather is telling you this before it's about them. When there's natural disasters that are unexpected, like an earthquake or wildfires, you still have to be thinking and knowing that you're responsible for that guest. You have to provide information. You have to provide safety stuff. Like, we have generators in the house. We have extra water tanks in the house. We have solar panels and we have my boyfriend was just calling me this morning because he's back in Puerto Rico, and we have a kid of, if the electricity goes out, here's a USB fan, here's a little foldable solar panels that you could charge your phone, because it might be out of your hands, but you can still be prepared for them. You
Yeah.
that mentality of like, well, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't do that. I
Right.
tend to just be like, okay, how can we go about helping you?
Yeah. So it sounds like it's a combination of preparedness ahead of time as much
Yes.
as you possibly can, and then just mitigating and communicating when it happens, not just ignoring it and hoping for the best.
Yeah, totally. Another thing is sort of like having a really good, strong house manual of like information that is local, from like hospital to the fire department to the police, because people might not know how to reach the police. You're thinking, oh, well, of course everybody knows 911. Not if you're coming from Europe. No, they don't.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You know, so is having that information available for guests, for them not to be lost in your house, and then for you to also communicate and make sure that they're safe, because your home. I mean, if you are a local host, for me, I'm the remote host. I'm lost over there,
Yeah.
but I have people that are local.
Right. Hmm.
So it's having that local knowledge of like, hey, this is what's happening, trees are down, or the river is overflowing. Anything that happens, especially nowadays, we cannot just cover our eyes and say like, whatever, it's a dumb, because it is your home and they're staying there.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. That's really good insight. I like to tell people too, when I've been asked this question, that it's not what happens, it's how you deal with what happens that means the most, because you still probably got a 5-star review, even though a guest checked in with no power. You would think automatically you're going to get a terrible review, but it sounds like you handled it really well.
Yeah, 5 stars from that particular guest. Other guests, not necessarily, but yes, that guest, yes.
Yeah.
So but it's handling those situations and handling like, look, you're gonna have natural disasters, and then you're gonna have your home disasters.
Yeah.
The hot tub is not working,
Right.
the heater broke, um, something's happened in your house, that you're gonna have emergencies, and you just have to have the right communication. Even like last year during COVID, I had templates of communications of how I communicated with guests, how I would tell them, look, we're closing down, we're doing this. I had travel nurses, so I got rid of a lot of reservations during April and May in New York, because I was like, I'm turning my house over to travel nurses.
Mm.
And not that anybody was going to show up anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's sort of like communication is so important with your cast. And
Yeah.
especially because it's not like you're on the phone talking to them. So that written communication is most important. And you have to be very clear and make it, if you think you're clear, have someone else read it, because
Mm.
it might not be.
Oh yeah. And what you think you're saying is different than what people are hearing. Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
especially if they have different languages.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, such great advice. I feel like I could talk about this stuff all day. I'll narrow it down to one last question for you.
Sure.
So when you think back from the time that you started 11 years ago, what's one thing that you wish you would have known when you first started, or maybe the biggest lesson that you've learned along the way?
Um, I think the biggest lesson is that you're dealing with people. We all humans having a human experience. You have no idea why a guest is reacting the way they're reacting.
Mm.
So it's having that empathy towards like, for them. They might ask you 20 times the same question, right? Like when there's an inquiry. And then for you, it's deciding, am I not being clear on answering that question?
Right.
Um, you might not take things personal. Like when I was living with guests, like they will leave the door unlocked.
Yeah.
And so when I was dating, it was like, oh, they leaving the door unlocked, they are disrespecting you. And I'm like, no, they just think that the door will lock automatically when you throw it. They don't know that they have to lock it. So I changed the locking system. and it avoided a problem. So it's sort of like thinking like that people are coming to your house that they don't know, being clear about rules, and just also having that like empathy with people, not being afraid to ask.
Yeah.
Also, not even being afraid to ask when you get a bad review, and try to say, hey, how could I do better?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, especially for us, because we put so much effort in our homes,
Mhm.
right? And in our vacation rentals, we want people to have a good experience. So when we get less than 5 stars, we're like, oh, how dare they? But it's not how dare they. It's more like, well, where was I short?
Mm.
What was missing for them not to give me 5 stars?
Yeah. So higher responsibility level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great advice. That just, I mean, in general, but especially for vacation rental owners, because it's so true. There's so many little things that you're like, oh, why'd the guest do that? But it's, yeah, what did I do that kind of could have caused that, or what are they going through? And giving them the benefit of the doubt.
And I get
Really,
it. Look, a
really good
lot of
advice.
hosts talk about like, well, why didn't they ask me while they were staying there?
Mhm.
Um, and my question to you is, do you think the guests had the opportunity to ask those questions? Do you have your communications line up where you send them like, hey, if there's any problems, let me know?
Yeah,
Do you check in on your guests? And some people just will not tell you.
yeah,
Just not everybody's going to tell you. They're going to wait until the end and give you a bad review because the toaster wasn't working.
yeah.
And how do you find out if the toaster's working? Because it's not like the cleaner is going to try the toaster,
Right. Yeah.
right? Hopefully they get rid of the crumbs, but they're not going to like toast to make sure it's working.
Yeah.
And you're like, had you told me, I would have sent you a new toaster.
Yeah.
But
Right.
thank you for telling me, because now I'll replace it for the next one.
Hmm. Yeah. There's a
Right.
lot of that stuff. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such great advice. I appreciate that. I could ask you a lot more questions, but I know we're at the end of our time here. But I really appreciate all your advice. What's the best? I know I was actually looking at your site, and I saw the essential checklist that people can download, which is awesome. It's got links to all the materials and or furnishings that you put in and recommend for an Airbnb. And it was funny because I was looking through it and I'm like, oh, that's the same type of bed we order. And there's a lot of similarities that work really well. So how can people get that? How can people learn more about you?
Go to thehostingjourney.com and find me there. I give a lot of free resources as well. Besides the checklist, there's other things that you dig in. They're there. Look, and it's funny because I use my list right now for building my places. I'm like, okay, did I get this? Oh, okay, I have the curtains. Oh, I have the waste baskets in the bedrooms. Okay, because you forget, right?
Right, exactly.
You like, there's so many things that
Yeah.
that we have to buy to have a place ready, especially if you're buying a place or renting a place with no furnishings. You got to make sure that everything is there. So thehostingjourney.com. I also have a YouTube channel, The Hosting Journey, and Facebook group, The Hosting Journey. Everything is The Hosting Journey.
Awesome.
But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's been great to have you, and good luck with the rest of your cancer treatments as well.
Oh, thank you. I have a
And
doctor's appointment at 3:30 in a little bit.
good.
All
Oh
is
yeah,
well. All is
no,
well.
good. That's good to hear. And
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be good to follow up with you and stay connected.
Yes, like always. Let's find ourselves out there in the interwebs.
All right,
Thank you
sounds
so much,
good.
Harvey.
Thanks again, Evelyn.